Hey everybody, welcome so much and thank you for joining us today. I don't know if you've heard, there's a playtest going on currently right now for the Character Operations Manual for Starfinder. In that playtest, there were 3 classes that you could play. It's ending very, very, very soon. You've still got some time, but it's going to be ending very soon. And to kind of put a bow on it, to send it off into this gentle good night, we thought we would have a wrap-up show for the playtest. And to do that, we've got none other than Owen Casey Stevens.
Hi, folks.
And Robert G. McCreary, Rob G. McC himself. The first question that a lot of people have, hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This is going to be good. I've got some questions from the message board. Thank you very much. And we've got some interesting tidbits about the playtest. And first off, the very first thing is, how long do people have for this playtest before it's done, before it's not a thing anymore?
Tonight. It ends tonight at officially midnight, but we probably won't actually close the surveys until tomorrow morning. So
we're not staying up late just to press a button.
Okay.
Right. So if you've play tested and you haven't had a chance to fill out a survey yet, you still have a few hours. Go to the link on our website. Fill out your surveys.
If you're watching this live, if you're watching it on YouTube, it's too late.
That is a good point.
It's probably done by now.
But today, live today, we still have time.
At this moment.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that's on everybody's mind is every time you guys are on, specifically the both of you, somebody ends up spoiling something. Somebody ends up spilling the beans. Sometimes it was staged.
Staged?
Behind the curtain.
Say it ain't so.
Sometimes it was staged. But other times it wasn't. So let me ask you this, planned or unplanned, what do you give the percentage that we're going to hear a spoiler coming out in today's episode?
90?
90 seems good.
I like them odds. That's not bad at all. Okay, well, good.
50? No.
Well, now it's getting worse.
I know. It could be any. Who knows?
That sound you hear are people clicking off to another channel because
no,
they're
come
like,
back.
oh, no spoilers, never
They
mind.
can't hear you. They're already on another channel.
33.3%. That's exactly it. Water slide. Yeah. First of all, how did the playtest go overall?
Overall, it's going really well. As we said, you still got until tonight, so all the answers we're going to be giving are based on our first overview of the data. Obviously, we've been reading the message boards pretty regularly, but we aren't going to getting into like recursive analysis of the surveys until we have all the data, because that's going to be a lot of crunching, and I don't want to do it more than once.
Yeah, that's fair.
So there are things like we can say with high confidence that we have enough survey data, that we have confidence in the numbers, we know what our margin of error is likely to be. We've gotten plenty of responses about all of the classes, which I really appreciate, because we mentioned at one point that the Witch Warper was sort of lagging behind. There's some weird, interesting little things that have popped up, like the Witch Warper has the fewest responses, but the highest percentage of completion of the people that responded. I don't necessarily know
Okay, hang on a second.
The fewest people have started the survey.
Yes.
But of those who have started, it's the highest percentage of people that finished the survey.
Interesting.
So the Witch Warper appears to have a dedicated opinion base. None of these numbers are way off. This is something that Rob was mentioning. You were looking at all of the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, the Witch Warper has the fewest number of responses, but all 3 of the classes are close to each other. It's a pretty even spread. If you look at the actual specific numbers, they are a little bit off. They're not exactly equal. But,
right. That's interesting, though. That is a really kind of curious piece of data. I
think Vanguard we have the most. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's fine.
I think like Vanguard is the most, Witch Warper's the least, but they're all pretty. They're pretty much even in terms of. I think all 3 of them have been well play tested.
It's interesting. Is there a front runner as to this one is doing better than the rest of them, or this one's getting played a lot more than the rest of them, or anything like that?
So some of that information I might be able to get when I do the analysis at the end, because I can look at things like how many of these responses came from players of a class, how many came from a GM, and that might tell me if we've got more GMs responding that class got played more.
Okay.
But I haven't gotten that kind of breakdown yet, because again, I don't want to have to do that math more than once. I would say that all of them are getting generally positive responses. One of the things that we had to look at, right, is what happens if 99% of people say, I hate the Biohacker as a concept. I don't want this in the game. It's terrible. Everything's broken. And we talked about that, right? One of the reasons we did this so early was so that if we had a complete disaster, we had time to come in and say, okay, well, that's 10 pages of the book we're throwing out. What do we do now? The flip side of that is that means we couldn't have everything, right? Like we only had a very few Witch Warper spells. One of the common pieces of feedback we've gotten is that the Witch Warper needs a spell list with more unique spells. That's always been the plan. That stuff just takes time to develop.
Right.
And some of those spells will be based on exactly how the Witch Warper works. So until we have the Witch Warper nailed down, it's difficult to have the spells completely nailed down. Just in order to have time to really incorporate this feedback so that all of this work that everyone's doing, which we really appreciate, has the maximum impact of getting the game people want, we had to go early in the process, which is why, and we hadn't even announced this when we announced the playtest, right? So
right. So then I think Wingbreaker's got the perfect idea. If there's a shirt for the Witch Warper, the tagline is, "We're weird, but we're dedicated."
We're weird, but we're dedicated. That's exactly right.
That's on Paizo's channel, so we own that now. I'm sorry, that's just how it works. Don't ask a lawyer. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about. So let's get into some things. First of all, from the playtest, what were some oversights or some, I don't want to say mistakes, but
you can say mistakes.
Missteps that you might have caught from the surveys and the data that you got from that?
I think one of the biggest things we've talked about was the Vanguard and not having anything at first level to spend entropy points on.
Yeah, that is a core mechanic of the class. Here's your entropy pool.
Yeah.
And at first level, there is nothing to do with them. Do I have one? Yes. Then I get the advantage for having one. Does it matter how many you have? Not even a little at first level. No. And that's just an oversight. That's the sort of thing where
they add some ambiance to your living room if you have them.
Yes.
At first level.
There's a little feng shui going on if you have your entropy points properly arranged. And that's the sort of thing where if we had had more time for development, we probably would have caught that ourselves, although I can't guarantee it. It's not like we don't make mistakes, right?
Right.
But we needed to get these out in front of people as soon as we had drafts that were not embarrassing. We've also noted that a lot of people say that they're having trouble getting their Vanguards into combat fast enough because they tend to be melee combatants.
Oh, yeah.
So here we have two things. Here's something that which the Vanguard needs to be able to do that they're not good at. Here's something that they need to be able to spend points on that they don't currently have an option for. I'm not saying that those two things are going to be joined into one solution, but that's certainly going to be one of the things we're going to be looking at really early on. You were talking about the Biohacker, the two builds of Biohacker?
Yeah, there's two. The Biohacker can go two different ways. The Instinctive or Studious, which is your key ability score. It becomes either intelligence or wisdom. We thought it'd be a cool way to make two different types of biohackers. Of course, what ends up happening is if you pick the intelligence biohacker, you get to add your intelligence to your will save, which is something that nobody else gets to do. So it makes it a lot better than just the wisdom-based one, which just gets their regular wisdom and intelligence goes to skill points. So they're not quite, those two choices are not equally balanced, and that's something that we just kind of didn't realize or didn't notice.
We thought it was certainly possible that they weren't going to be balanced. One of the things you want to do in a playtest is take ideas that might go too far and put them in front of people and see if they do in fact go too far.
Right.
We do not often in Starfinder allow you to take a modifier that is not normally associated with an ability and use it. Really, in the core rulebook, the fact that operative weapons can use dexterity instead of strength for an attack roll is pretty much it. But the designers and the original developers of the class thought this was a cool option so that you could really focus on your int. And so we thought, let's try it. Let's see, because if it turns out that that doesn't create an imbalance, let's get that data. But both the anecdotal evidence, people talking about it in message boards, and when we ask, is there anything to change that, and just the empirical, how many people built a Studious versus how many people built an Intuitive, just overwhelmingly shows that those two options aren't balanced, and that ability seems to be causing a problem all by itself. That's useful information that we can then use taking the class forward.
Right, absolutely. But then speaking of, so Lori's asking the same question that I'm kind of going to be asking, the solution for the level 1. Not having any options there. So that gets into, do you have the solutions for that yet? Or is that something that says, okay, we need to worry about that now? Or is that something that says, we still have a lot of time left before this book comes out, and we'll get to that? Well, what are the steps there?
Earlier this week, we were actually talking about that process. You want to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so we don't really have solutions lined up now because we're waiting. I mean, we do have plenty of ideas that we couldn't fit into the classes, or as things, as we've seen feedback come through on the message boards, we've started talking about some of these things. But we haven't, I don't think, there's not a lot of decisions that have been made at this point because we really want to give wait until we get all the feedback. From that, we're gonna once we close down the playtest, we're gonna look at all the feedback. We're gonna go through and see, the whole Starfinder team is gonna meet and sort of talk about what are sort of some of the highlights that we definitely want to address and everything. Then they're going to go back into a sort of another design and development phase, and then we'll kind of run them through their paces on the team as well. Yeah. Or at that point. Yeah.
So I've got a document that is the playtest document that I've been annotating with ideas and concerns and comments as they come up, so I don't forget something, especially when going through the message boards, right? So there are places where it says, this appears to be terrible. Here are the top 3 things that people have suggested or that I've come up with. I put a question mark after all of them. But then that is just, this needs to be discussed. And we'll get the whole brain trust in to look at that and figure out how we want to do it, especially since you don't want to have a solution for one part of a class now when we're not sure where all the problems are, because we still want these things to be balanced. And so if we're going to tune something up at first level, but we get feedback that this class is already overpowered at 14th and higher, then if we're making it more powerful at lower level already, we have to look at something else where we might tune it back a little bit. Right. So that needs to be a holistic approach.
So then, speaking of getting these documents together, looking at all the things that you're going to have to change.
Yep.
This is going to have to happen. We have to add these things, write these things. Is there something that stands out that you're like, I am super excited to jump in and do these things, or implement these changes, or kind of shape this class because the feedback maybe said it needs to be more like this and not like that? Is there something that stands out that you're like, I'm excited to jump in and do that part?
You had a plan for the Biohacker. You mentioned it before the show.
No, that's all right.
Okay. He did.
Yeah, don't save it for the show or anything, Rob.
No. So one of the things that I found very interesting is that there are places where the class performs the way that we intended to perform it. But some people, upon looking at the class, just glossing over it, got a different impression of how that class should function.
Oh, right.
So as an example, the Vanguard is a melee-focused class, and it's a class that is primarily built around Constitution as your primary score and Dexterity as your secondary score. Because it's a melee-focused class, many players look at it and they say, well, that is a strength-based score. I've been playing D20-based games since 2000. I know that if you're a melee combatant, strength is your most important ability score. And for the Vanguard, as currently written, it isn't. So that gives us an opportunity to go one of at least a couple of ways. We could say, okay, people want to build high-strength Vanguards. We shouldn't penalize them for that. So we should adjust the class so that that becomes a viable build, that you're not doing the wrong thing by doing it.
Right.
If we don't go that route, since we've learned that a lot of people take away from looking at it that they should, then we need to put more signposts on there. We need to discuss in the class description and some of the special abilities. We need to talk about the fact that not only is Constitution your primary score and maybe Dexterity your secondary, but that the Vanguard isn't traditionally one based on the power of thews and muscles and might. We have to hammer that harder. And there are several things throughout the playtest where, like, it is clear and obvious that this is intended to work this way, and then we get a fair amount of feedback saying, well, I tried to do it this other way, which seems how it obviously worked, and it didn't work. I had to do this other thing over here.
Right.
And that's not a failure of players, right? That is a failure of the design to properly convey our expectation. And we can fix that a couple of different ways. I'm really excited to get that feedback and see where are we going to adjust the rules to match player expectation, and where are we going to adjust presentation to try and adjust what people expect when they read it.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point. When do you know which one to go with? When do you know we need to shape this because this is what's expected, or we need to present this differently so that the expectation aligns with our design?
Some of that is a question, rather than of rules design, of more a creative director role. I was joking about the fact that we could change the Biohacker class to be called the Injectomancer. That would let you.
I think that the Squawks Hacker is actually a better.
Squawks Hacker?
The Squawks Hacker is a better way to go with that.
Which only hacks Squawkses?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that's going to happen,
from a creative standpoint,
right, is that when we are pitching ideas, right, if I say, hey, we could change this way, one of Rob's jobs is to look at all of Starfinder and say, does that match how I want that game universe to go?
Yeah.
How do you approach those questions when you're looking at that? I
mean, you kind of just have to weigh the different things. I mean, I think we try to, or I try to see most of that stuff at the beginning when we first concepted these classes. You know, that they would have a role to fit into within the universe, that they don't sort of step on the toes of any of the existing classes. That's the kind of thing. So sort of the specifics don't matter. That's completely more subjective if it's just like, well, I don't really like that, but that's not really what I'm trying to do, because it's not these are for everybody. So it's just more about, I don't know, a sense of things. And also, I mean, you know, the whole Starfinder team also has their own thoughts about stuff. And I think we share a pretty good shared vision of the world.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We just want people to fit in. We just want these things to fit into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there anything that, based off of feedback that you got from the surveys, that almost right away you were like, this is too bulky, this is too cumbersome, this doesn't fit, and we know automatically, very quickly, we know that this is not going to last?
Yeah, there's at least one.
Okay.
The Vanguard's Entropic Strike, as currently written, if you are using a weapon that is within 2 levels of your Vanguard level, you can apply its weapon special features through your Entropic Strike to your attack. That description has already lost half the people watching, right? That's just too many words. Those people that followed along have immediately realized, wait a minute, what if the weapon I want to use, I only have one of every 5 levels? That means that I could be at a level where I can't afford the one that is higher level than me, and the one that worked for me last level doesn't work anymore. I can't do this thing. So my character is suddenly less effective than he was at a previous level, and that's never what we're trying to do. Now, there are design reasons within the rules of why that's how the rule is written to begin with, but it just, as soon as that hit players, it was one of the very first things we got feedback was can we loosen up the tight restrictions here? So we will need to find another way to address those rules concerns, those balance concerns, without telling people you have to hop back and forth amongst 3 different weapons.
Okay. Rob? Anything stand out?
I mean, nothing that's that cumbersome. I mean, there's all sorts of little things. Another thing from the Vanguard is with their Entropic Strike, it's considered to have the blocking property, but they're entropic, and which gives you basically a +1 enhancement bonus to your armor class. Right. When they have entropy points in their entropic pool, they get a +1 bonus to the enhancement bonus to their armor class. Those two don't stack, so effectively making one of those pointless. So that's something that came out very early and is an easy enough. It's like, well, we probably don't need to give them the blocking property. We'll probably replace it with something else. But there's a number of little things like that that are just kind of, you know, slipped by. It's like, okay, yeah, we need to fix that. That's a contradiction.
And some of this is playstyle stuff. When I look at a character class, I am frequently looking at, okay, what are the little marginal bonuses that I can compile together for the greatest utility? So if you tell me, hey, if I have entropy points, I get a +1 enhancement bonus to AC, and I've got blocking on this attack, so if I attack a person, I get a +1 enhancement bonus to AC against one guy, I immediately think of all the cases where you'd only get one or the others of those. So to me, having both of those makes perfect sense. We're saying, hey, you get this a lot. You really end up having this under a lot of circumstances. But a lot of playtesters look at it and they say, well, that's clearly a mistake. That's stupid, so one of those should be taken away. That's a case where the way I look at a build of a class seems to be different from the way most of the people playing does, and there are better, simpler solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's do this. Let's kind of focus on some things that, looking at the data and seeing how people are playing, what worked out better than you thought? Like, what were you looking at and you're like, hey, this is actually flying exactly like we expected it to? If anything?
Well, so we never anywhere in our description of the Vanguard use the game design term tank, right? We don't say this is your tank. What we did was we built it so that it would hopefully encourage a specific style of play. One of the things we were inspired by was that a lot of players had said, I can't build a tank in Starfinder. This is a character concept I want, and no class currently does it well. So we did want it to be able to fill that role without being restricted to that role. So the fact that on day one, the message boards was filled with people saying, oh, I get to build a tank, I'm so happy, tells me that that goal that we want to both have one that game mechanically does it and have it set up so that that seems like an obvious choice for it worked really, really well. There are some tweaks in there on how to make that work in a tabletop game as opposed to a video game where it's easy to have systems that force people to attack you so that your tankiness is built into it. Choice is a little different in a tabletop game, but the core mechanics have been very well received, and people have largely described in play that it worked well.
Yeah, that's one of the things, one of the survey questions for the Vanguard, well, for all of them really, but it's like, what did you like most about playing the Vanguard? And a lot of those responses have been like, it's a really good tank. It's a tank for Starfinder. And it's like, yeah, awesome. That's exactly, like many just variations on that same theme. It's like, yay, finally a tank. And it's like, cool.
So then, what So I'm getting, this is one of the questions from the message board, and so I want to make sure that we get to this one because I've actually seen this on social media come up too. What changes do you think you'll be making to the skill selection bonuses for the playtest classes, especially regarding Starship combat? And this is something, whether this exact question or the idea of Starship combat and how those classes that we're playtesting right now, how we plan to alter or adjust to fit into Starship combat. Is it still too soon for something like that, or where does that stand basically?
So it's very interesting looking at the data. More people were satisfied with the way all three of these classes operated in Starship combat than were dissatisfied by a pretty large margin. Also, more people playing didn't engage in Starship combat. So we've got a smaller pool there, right? Because only the people that engaged in Starship combat are giving us that feedback.
Right.
It is clear to us that there are some things we want to do about Starship combat overall, and we have some ideas, and we have some freelancers that have written some stuff for us, and we're going to be looking at developing that. So we are not ignoring this question. We definitely want to make sure that when we do these classes, they fit the paradigm of Starfinder, that you don't have to build your character to be focused on Starship combat in order to be able to usefully contribute to Starship combat. But we are not at a point where there is a single solution we know we're going to take, so I don't want to even hint at what they are, because I don't want to say something and have someone say, oh, they're going to do this, and then we go a different direction and they're disappointed. That's the whole pie versus cake thing I've talked about before.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But it's absolutely, we're looking at the feedback, and I would say that there are a lot of suggestions on things we can do that are helpful in giving us a direction of what kind of things people would like to see. So if we can take those and make one that we think fits within the paradigm of what we're wanting to do with the classes on a balance level and a spotlight protection level and a do they make sense in the world level, that is stuff that we will definitely do. Something will be changing. Exactly what it is, I'm not sure yet.
Okay. So then what, again, going into this question, I know, who knows if you can answer this or not, because it is in this weird stage of still gathering feedback, understanding a lot of the things that need to be tweaked or emphasized or pulled back, but not really necessarily having those solutions just yet. So it's that weird in-between phase. But is there any way that you can say what other exciting things you're working on to put in the character operations manual at this point, besides those three classes? Or again, is it still focused on this and everything else is still
Rob, you're the creative director. Is there anything you want to say we're definitely putting in the the character operations manual?
I'm not fishing for spoilers, but I'm totally fishing for spoilers.
Well, of course, the playtest is just for the three classes, but the book will have lots more stuff. We're still working on it, so there's lots of stuff that we don't know what the final things are. There's going to be lots of options for lots of players, or for hopefully every player. I know one thing that I worked on for the book that I'm kind of excited about is the Battleflower archetype.
Okay, so that's something we hadn't talked about at all. So talk to us a little bit about Battleflower archetype.
Here we go.
So we have the planet of Triaxis, and on Triaxis is the immortal suzerainty of Ning, and there is a group of people from Ning called Ukara or Battleflowers. This goes back to Pathfinder days. There's and I had some stuff with that, so I thought this would be a really cool thing to bring forward into Starfinder. In Pathfinder, they were all what we called Triaxians back then, which are now Riforians in Starfinder. But anybody can take this thing. It's like if you go to Ning and become one of these, they're basically like celebrity gladiators, and
nice.
it kind of mixes well with the icon theme or the gladiator theme, and it's just like, yeah, you're gonna go perform and become a big celebrity is sort of in martial arts combat. So,
oh, cool. All right.
That should be, I'm excited about that appearing.
And that's exactly the sort of thing that I like having fun with, and I was really glad that Rob wanted to write that we agreed that it would be a good thing to put in the book. We want Starfinder to be its own thing, right? But that thing is built on the same cosmology and history as Pathfinder. So sometimes we want to look at something and say, oh, that's a cool idea. How would that change? How would that be modified? How would that work in Starfinder? And there's going to be both, generic things like there's a gladiator theme, right? We already did that. We will have other generic things, or like here's a concept that we think a lot of players want to play with, but also things that are tied to specific backgrounds and histories within the game. I'm excited about a lot of it, and I look forward to being able to preview it in months and months and months and months.
Yeah.
So I'm excited that Rob has let slip a little bit.
Yeah, probably a blog first with a a few images here and there.
Someday,
and then,
right?
And then
we're
a
just
deep dive.
we're in such early days on this project.
Yeah,
So normally we're not talking about what goes in a product like this at all at this point.
Right, right. Do we have a planned release date for the character operations manual, or is that one of those things that's like not right now?
It's fall 2019.
Fall 2019.
That's what we've said so far. We'll keep on that.
All right, yeah. We'll just write that down in ink, so we're ready to go. Fall 2019.
Eventually, it will appear on Paizo.com with a release date, and then we'll start doing. We'll probably have streams talking more about the book and other stuff like that.
And of course, anytime that both of us are on the show, there's a chance one of us will blab something. So
that's true.
I think the chances are pretty good. So
we've got an excellent track record so far, or a terrible track record so far. It's
depends on your outlook.
On your outlook.
So let me ask you this: I do have a few questions about the playtest itself, and if. And someone is asking from the message boards again, if we're planning on doing another playtest, is there a thought to maybe having just a streamlined GM feedback for this thing? Because the feedback is that they had, there's so many surveys to fill out every time. And so, and I guess that leads into probably the final question that I have for this first part of the show, which is almost over, by the way, is what were the big lessons learned from the playtest, and what did you take away, and maybe for future planning, what do we think we would do different?
Want to talk about the GM thing?
Yeah, I think I saw that question on the message boards. I think that's a really good bit of feedback, because we did put in, in the surveys, there was saying, are you a GM or a player? But obviously, if you're a GM playing for a group of people, what are you going to fill out 4 surveys or whatever? So I think it's a little bit of an oversight that certainly makes sense. And in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, maybe we should have put in just a GM focused survey. Hopefully we can still get some information.
Yeah.
And looking at most of the responses that we've gotten, I think it's safe to say, have been from players.
Yes, the majority.
Yeah, because there was a thing, were you a player or were you a GM? So most of those, or both, yeah. But so we have gotten good GM feedback. Yeah.
And one of the things that I have not yet done that I'm looking forward to doing is I can currently say, right, that the majority of people seem to like how Shield works, but I can click a button and determine, do the majority of GMs and the majority of players like how shields work, or does it turn out that one of those two groups doesn't, and it's offset by the popularity of the other, right? That's important information. We don't want to create something that all players love and all GMs go, oh, I don't want to have to deal with this. So that's a place where we have not gone into that level of analysis, but we certainly plan to.
Yeah. Speaking of the shield, I have a question.
Yeah.
Conveniently located in the chat. Is there room to expand soldiers that want to use the shield as a fighting style, like for bashing and things like that? Is that something that we might see coming down the pipeline at some point?
That's something that we might see in this book.
Okay.
We had, and I don't want to get into specifics because the creative director's glaring at me already.
And we're still in process.
Yes,
we're still working.
Reply hazy. Ask again later. Certainly, we've introduced shields. We thought it was important that Vanguards be play tested with the shields, and that we give the shields, since it's a whole new way of doing equipment, something we have not previously had in the rules system. We wanted to get it play tested, whereas we don't normally play test individual styles of equipment. Once we're putting them in the game, we're going to want to look at all the people that it makes sense for that to interact with, and I think we would agree that soldiers, it makes sense for them to interact with shields.
They are already proficient in them,
yes.
So it does make sense that they would have something.
But I mean, soldiers have gear boosts and they've got fighting styles, and so I don't know what form that will take or when it would come, but it's a pretty obvious area to go into the design space, and I think it makes sense conceptually within the universe.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right, so let me do this. We are right at the time where segment 1 of the show is done. So that was the first half hour, and then I'll do a goodbye to the folks that are watching on YouTube.
Can I say something before you do that?
Rob, you absolutely have the floor, my friend.
I just want to thank all of the fans and people that have contributed to the playtest and have posted on the boards. I think it was really good discussions on the message boards, and everybody kept cool even when people didn't like things. It's just everybody kept it really, really positive on the board. So I just want to thank everyone who has contributed or still will contribute tonight. If you want to take advantage of that time, I think we're going to be really happy. We're really looking forward to going through all the feedback and changing these classes based on that. So thank you to everyone that helped out.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. It's just great. I'm actually watching as I'm talking to you. I'm seeing what's happening in the chat, and people like Steve, welcome again to the show, are saying that you know, the transparency of Paizo is what, you know, makes them stand out as a company, and you know, the accessibility and all of that sort of thing, and that was kind of the whole point of doing shows like this, where it's like, we need your help with something. Please, let's have a conversation through gaming, and you can help us do some things, you know, and then not to harp on a thing, because last week was all about this, but you know, that PaizoCon continues that, and you know, all of us are there at PaizoCon, and so we try to be as approachable and you know, trying to enjoy the same games that everybody else is together. So yeah, if you're free, come to PaizoCon. We can all give you high fives. Anything else?
We're good.
We're good. All right. Well, let's. I'm going to say goodbye, and then we'll do some Q&A. All right. That is going to do it for today's episode. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook or wherever, playtest is probably closed by that point, and I'm sorry you missed out, but you have the character operations manual to look forward to. Maybe fall 2019. We're not 100% sure about that because it's still being made. But keep an eye out. I'm sure you'll see a show covering that entire book right here on twitch.tv/officialpaizo. And if you have anything else, put a comment down in YouTube's and let us know if we can answer a question for you. If you want to be a part of the Q&A that we're getting ready to start right now with the Twitch chat, join us. It happens every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific right here at twitch.tv/officialpaizo. And in the meantime, for Paizo, for Owen and Rob, and for me, I'm your old buddy Dan. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you again next time. Bye.
Bye, folks.